My mother called my brother her greatest achievement the night he got engaged. She said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, and no one corrected her. I was standing 4 feet away. That moment didn't break me. Honestly, by then, I'd gotten so used to being invisible in my own family that I almost didn't register it. Almost. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and I spent the better part of a decade building something quiet and real, while my family looked everywhere except at me. This is the story of the night they finally had to look. I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, the kind of suburb where the houses are big, the lawns are perfect, and everyone quietly knows everyone else's business. My father worked in hospital administration for most of my childhood, eventually becoming the director of operations at a regional health network in the Greater Toronto area. My mother ran the household and, more accurately, ran the family's reputation. She was the kind of woman who volunteered for every school committee, not because she cared about the outcome, but because she needed to be the one deciding it. My brother Daniel was born 4 years after me. From the moment he could walk, my parents treated him like a rare and fragile thing. He was charming the way people are charming when they've never once been told no. Easy smile, confident posture, a laugh that filled the room. By the time he was in high school, my father was already calling him the one who's going to carry this family forward. I was 16 when I first heard that phrase. I remember thinking, carry it forward from what? We were comfortable. Vivérent a dynaste. But that was the thing about my family. My father had constructed an idea of legacy that had nothing to do with reality, and everything to do with optics. What mattered wasn't what you actually did. It was what people thought you did. And Daniel, with his easy confidence and his business degree from Western, fit that image perfectly. I didn't. I was quieter. I was more interested in medicine than money, more interested in systems than appearances. I went to McMaster for nursing, which my mother greeted with the kind of tight smile that means she's swallowing something she doesn't want to say out loud. She said it eventually, of course. She always did. Nursing is a good, stable job, Claire. Just not quite what we envisioned. I was 22 when she said that. I had a 3.9 gigapascals and a scholarship. She was worried about what she'd tell her friends at the golf club. After I graduated, I took a position at a hospital in Hamilton. The work was hard and the hours were long, and I loved it completely. I was good at it, not in a way that was obvious from the outside, but in the way that matters. Patients remembered me, colleagues trusted me, and I started noticing the same problems over and over again, mostly around discharge coordination. Patients, especially elderly patients, patients from low-income households, patients whose first language wasn't English, were being discharged without proper follow-up. They'd come back to the ER within 2 weeks, sicker than before, because the transition from hospital to community care was broken. So I started fixing it. Informally at first, just staying late, making calls, building relationships with community health workers, connecting families with resources that technically existed, but that nobody was guiding them toward. Then a colleague of mine, a social worker named Priya, suggested we formalize it, write it up, apply for funding. We did, and it worked. 3 years after I first submitted our proposal to the Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, our program, which Priya and I had named Bridgepoint Care Transitions, was operating in 4 hospitals across Hamilton and Burlington, with a team of 12 and a second-year budget of just under $800,000. We weren't a corporation. We weren't venture-backed. We were a registered nonprofit with a government grant, a private donor from the healthcare sector, and a waiting list of hospital networks who wanted to partner with us. I was proud of it, deeply, quietly proud. I told my parents about it, once. I explained what we did, how the program worked, what the outcomes looked like. My father nodded the way he nodded when he was waiting for me to finish. My mother asked if I was still technically just a nurse, or if I now had a different title. I said I was the executive director and co-founder of a healthcare nonprofit. She said, "Oh, that's sweet, Claire." Then she asked if Daniel had called me about his promotion. He'd been made a senior associate at a commercial real estate firm in Mississauga. She mentioned his salary. I didn't ask. She told me anyway. That was 14 months before the wedding. Daniel got engaged to a woman named Sophie in the spring. I'd met Sophie twice, once at Christmas, once at a birthday dinner my mother had organized. She was warm and direct and clearly smart, working as a healthcare policy analyst for a think tank based in Ottawa. I liked her immediately, which was slightly inconvenient, because it meant I had to keep caring about my brother's life, even when I'd mostly decided to care about it from a careful distance. The wedding was set for late September, at a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake. My mother called me in June to discuss my role, which turned out to be attending. That was it. No speech, no reading, no role in the planning. Daniel had asked 2 of his university friends to be groomsmen. My mother had asked Daniel's fiancée's younger sister and 2 of her own friends' daughters to be in the bridal party. I was a guest, a family guest, my mother clarified, which I think was meant to sound like an upgrade. I booked my room at the inn, bought a dress, arranged to have someone cover my on-call responsibilities that weekend. I wasn't bitter about the role. I'd stopped expecting more than that years earlier. What I was, if I'm being honest, was tired of the low-grade effort it took to show up for a family that never quite showed up for me, and of pretending that didn't cost anything. My father called me the week before the wedding, which was unusual enough that I actually pulled over to answer. He wanted to let me know, and I could hear the particular careful tone he used when he was packaging something, that the seating at the reception was going to be a bit tight, and that I'd been placed at a table with some family friends, rather than at the main family table. "You understand," he said. "It's just logistics." I said I understood. I didn't say anything else. Neither did he. The main family table seated 10. My parents, Daniel and Sophie, Sophie's parents, Sophie's sister, and her partner, and 2 of my mother's siblings. There was, I later counted, exactly 1 empty seat at that table during the cocktail hour. Nobody moved to fill it. I sat at a round table near the back of the room, with a retired couple from my mother's book club, a second cousin I'd met maybe 3 times, and a family friend, whose name I kept forgetting, and kept having to relearn over the course of the evening. They were perfectly nice people. That almost made it worse. During the dinner service, my mother gave a toast. She talked about Daniel's warmth, his ambition, the pride she felt watching him become the man he was. She talked about how Sophie had completed him. She said, near the end, that she hoped they would build the kind of family she and my father had built, rooted in love and real values. She did not look at me once during the entire toast. I counted. My father gave a toast too. His was shorter but landed harder, the way precise things do. He said Daniel had always been the kind of son a father dreams of. He said he was leaving him something not just at that moment, but in life, a foundation. He said, "Everything I built thinking of you." He was crying a little by the end. The room was genuinely moved. I drank my water. The person next to me patted my hand and said, "Your dad really loves your brother." I said, "Yes, he does." She meant it kindly. I knew that. After dinner, when the dancing started, I stepped outside onto the terrace. It was a clear September night, the kind that makes Ontario feel generous, cool enough to need a wrap, but warm enough to stay. I stood there for a while, just breathing, not thinking about anything specific, just giving myself a few minutes to be somewhere that wasn't that room. Sophie found me there. I hadn't expected that. She came out with 2 glasses of sparkling water and handed me one without asking, and stood next to me looking out at the vineyard, and was quiet for a moment before she spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said. I looked at her. "The seating," she said. "I didn't know until 2 days ago. My mother told me when she saw the chart. I want you to know I tried to change it, and your mother said the arrangements were final." She paused. "I'm sorry, Claire, that was wrong." I didn't know what to do with that kind of directness. I'd spent so many years in my family where nothing was named directly, that someone just saying the thing out loud felt almost foreign. I told her she didn't need to apologize. She said she wanted to anyway. We talked for a while. She asked about my work, genuinely asked the way people do when they're actually listening rather than waiting for their turn. I told her about Bridgepoint, about what we did, about the expansion we were planning into the Waterloo region. She got quiet in a way that I noticed. "Wait," she said. "Bridgepoint Care Transitions?" I said yes. She turned to look at me fully for the first time. "I cited your program in a policy brief I wrote for the federal government 8 months ago," she said. Your outcome data, the 30-day readmission reduction, we used it as the primary evidence base for a recommendation on discharge navigation funding. That brief went to the minister's office. She stopped. You're the co-founder. I said I was. She stared at me for a moment, with an expression I didn't immediately know how to read. Then she said, very quietly, does your father know what you've built? I thought about the phone call where I'd explained the program, the nod, the waiting for me to finish, my mother asking if I was still technically just a nurse. I said, I told him about it. Sophie looked back out at the vineyard. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, he's been trying to get a meeting with your executive director for 3 months, through the health network board he sits on. He wants to recommend federal infrastructure support. Your program is one of 3 they're evaluating for national-scale funding. She paused. He doesn't know it's you. I didn't say anything. The contact name on the intake form, she said carefully. It's listed under your co-founder's name, Priya Nair. I nodded. Priya handled most of our external relations because I was usually on the operational side. It was just how we'd divided things. Claire. Sophie set down her glass. The brief I wrote, the one that went to the minister, I recommended Bridgepoint by name as the model for a national program. If the evaluation goes well, we're talking about federal co-funding. Potentially 7 figures, over 5 years. Your father's board has been championing it internally. He's been in 3 meetings about it. She looked at me. He's been telling colleagues it's exactly the kind of innovation the system needs. I looked out at the vineyard. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing. I felt several things at once, in the way you do when something lands that you didn't expect. Not triumph, exactly. More like something very large and very quiet settling into place. Does Daniel know? I asked. Sophie said she wasn't sure. She said she'd found out because she recognized the program name when I mentioned it, and because she'd spent 8 months living with that brief. She said she wasn't going to say anything tonight unless I wanted her to. She said it was my call. I thought about it. The thing is, I wasn't angry at my father the way I might have been at 22. I was past the stage where I needed him to see me so I could know my own value. That knowledge had come slowly, through years of work that had nothing to do with him, through patients who got home safely and stayed home, through a team that trusted my leadership, through a quiet pride that was mine, in a way that didn't require anyone else's validation. But I thought about all those toasts, about table near the back, about everything I built. I built thinking of you, about my mother's face when I'd told her I was an executive director, and the way she'd pivoted immediately to Daniel's salary. I told Sophie, let the night end. I'd handle it in my own way. She nodded. She touched my arm briefly. Then she said, for what it's worth, and I know it doesn't fix anything, Daniel talks about you differently than your parents do. He asks about you. He just doesn't always know how to say it. I went back inside. I finished the evening at my table near the back. I danced once, with the retired gentleman from my mother's book club who turned out to be a very good dancer. I hugged Daniel before I left. He held on a beat longer than I expected. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from our program coordinator. My father had reached out again through the Health Network Board, requesting a meeting with our executive director. He'd attached a letter of support from 2 board members, and indicated that the federal evaluation timeline was moving faster than expected. I called Priya. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment, and then said, in the specific tone she uses when she's making a decision that's already made, you should take that meeting, Claire. I did. I didn't tell my father in advance. The meeting was arranged through our standard intake process, a video call, then an in-person, at our Hamilton office. He walked in with a colleague from the health network and a folder of documents and his professional smile, and he stopped when he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. I said, "Hi, Dad." He sat down. His colleague, who didn't know our history, introduced himself and moved straight into the agenda. And my father, to his credit, and I do give him this, gathered himself. He sat through that meeting. He heard the presentation. He looked at the outcome data, the operational model, the expansion plan. He asked 3 questions, all of them good ones, the kind of questions that meant he'd actually read the materials. At the end, His colleagues said Bridgepoint was the strongest candidate in the evaluation, and that they'd be recommending it to the federal working group. My father didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I know." He was looking at me when he said it. His colleague stepped out to take a call. My father and I were alone in the conference room for the first time in years. He looked older than I remembered, which shouldn't have surprised me but did. "How long?" he said. I told him. 7 years of building, 3 years of formal operation, 4 hospitals, 12 staff, the policy brief, the federal evaluation. I didn't say it to punish him. I said it because he asked, and because the facts were what they were. He nodded slowly. He looked at the table. Then he said something I hadn't expected and didn't know how to file away cleanly. I should have paid attention. Not "I'm proud of you," not an apology, just, I should have paid attention. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. And it was so insufficient and so true at the same time that I didn't know whether to feel grateful or wrecked. I felt both, briefly, and then I let it settle. I told him the program would benefit from the federal support. I told him I hoped the evaluation went well. I said I appreciated his board's advocacy, and I meant it, because the program wasn't mine alone. It was Priya's and our whole team's, and it deserved the support regardless of our history. He shook my hand when he left, like a colleague. It was strange and stiff, and also in some way I didn't expect appropriate. We weren't a warm family. This was the language we actually spoke. My mother called me that evening. Sophie had told Daniel, and Daniel had told her. I'd expected anger, the particular kind she deployed when she'd been caught in a contradiction. Instead, her voice was careful in a way I recognized as recalibration. She said, "Claire, I didn't realize how far things had gone with your work." I said, "I know." She said, "You should have told us more." I paused before I answered. I said, "I did, Mom." "You asked if I was still technically just a nurse." The line was quiet. She said she hoped we could have dinner soon. I said I'd check my schedule. I meant it. I would check my schedule. What I did with what I found there was still up to me. Daniel texted me that night. It was long for him, which meant it was 4 sentences. He said he was sorry he hadn't been paying attention. He said Sophie had read parts of the policy brief aloud to him, and he'd realized he didn't know anything about what I actually did. He said he'd like to change that, if I was open to it. He said, "You built something real, Claire. I'm proud of you." I read it twice. Then I wrote back, "Thank you. Let's get coffee." I don't have a tidy ending for this. My parents didn't transform overnight. My mother is still more comfortable talking about Daniel's career than mine. My father still defaults to professional distance where warmth might live. The federal evaluation is ongoing, and the outcome isn't certain. And my work doesn't need the validation of their attention to matter. But Daniel and I have had coffee 3 times since September. Sophie sends me articles she thinks will interest me, and they always do. And sometimes, in the particular quiet of early mornings when I drive into Hamilton and the highway is still dark, and the city is just beginning to move, I think about all those years of building something in the space where their attention wasn't, and I think about how that space turned out to be exactly the right place to work. You build in the quiet, you build where no one's watching. And then sometimes, if you're patient, they finally look up.